State of the State address. The membership of the State Assembly and State Senate have gathered in joint session in the Assembly chamber to hear Governor Carey's address, which marks the beginning of the 1980 legislative session. The governor will present his perspective on where New York State stands at the beginning of the 80s and will outline his plans for this, his 6th year as governor. Lieutenant Governor Mario Cuomo presides over the joint session of the Senate and Assembly.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Governor of the State of New York, Hugh L. Carey.
Lieutenant Governor Cuomo, Speaker Fink, Majority Leader Anderson, Controller Reagan, Attorney General Abrams, Reverend Bruner, members of the Judiciary, members of the honorable bodies, and ladies and gentlemen of the State of New York. This is the finest legislature I have ever seen in 1980. Over the past 5 years, we have shared a common struggle, and I draw a sense of confidence from being with you here today. Confidence from the knowledge of what we faced and what we achieved. Confidence from the political courage and wisdom shown in these halls. Confidence from the leadership that is the tradition of this legislature. But we live at a time when all the comforting landmarks of the past, all the presumptions of the culture of consumption, endless fuel, endless spending, endless growth, are being swept away. Nevertheless, we are not merely prisoners of some mechanism beyond our control, playing out roles others have written for us. New York has proven that. We confounded all those who said we were doomed to bankruptcy and default, to becoming a second-rate state. We accepted the sacrifice and the austerity required for recovery. We worked within the disciplines that were imposed upon us. We repudiated no debts, left no creditors unpaid or obligations unmet. Yet over a 5-year period, we saved our greatest cities from financial collapse and brought our state agencies back from the outer rim of risk. Now, however, we have the opportunity to stop reacting to the mistakes of the past and to weave a fabric of our own making. The way we shape and design the fabric of this government is in our hands, and we will choose whether we carry victory banners or crying towels. New Yorkers are not known for crying towels. Our choices are clear. We know the price of dependency on foreign oil. We must stop paying it. We cannot afford it. We know the results when government assumes every burden and tries to meet every need. If we could ever afford it, we cannot afford it now. We know inflation is a fire that turns our savings and earnings to ashes. We will not let our budgets fuel that fire. Our opportunity is one that exactly 40 years ago, Winston Churchill presented to the British people, who stood defiant against overwhelming odds. History can say of us, too, this was their finest hour. Let us begin, then, with compassion and determination to take the steps necessary to our purpose. First, we must reduce the burden of government on our citizens. At present, there are 8,700 separate taxing jurisdictions in New York State. They are spending $33 billion a year, the equivalent of $4,400 for every wage earner in the state. State and local employees number 900,000, 4 out of every 5 of them local. I am not proposing that government abandon our responsibilities to those in need. or lower our esteem for the valued workers we employ. But no one is served by government that is poorly organized and extended beyond its resources, vulnerable to crisis after crisis. No matter how superbly we respond, sooner or later we will be worn down, stripped of our power to react, permanently bound by constraints others have forced upon us. The choice is as ever: master events or be mastered by them. The government and people of this state must develop a new determination and exercise a new discipline. I am not speaking of a discipline that crushes human freedom, a discipline forced upon us, the strong, or forced by the strong, upon the powers and the poor and the powerless, but rather the disciplines of free men and women who choose to do what they must to save their state, their nation, and their families. We cannot survive these times without this self-discipline, without a determination by individuals and governments alike to face cold, hard facts. As a first step, I will outline in the forthcoming budget a specific plan to limit expenditure growth with legislation holding state expenditures to a percentage of state personal income. Beginning with this budget, I have imposed a lid on state spending, including local assistance. These steps ensure that planned tax cuts of more than $385 million will take effect this year, and cuts of nearly $500 million will occur in the year ahead. In addition, to reduce the cost of large seasonal borrowings, I shall propose that we take steps to change our revenue and expenditure system to conform with generally accepted accounting principles. In this way, budgets will reflect the future cost of our commitments rather than just current cash outlays. I am grateful to Comptroller Reagan for his assistance in the development of the new system, and I invite the leaders of the legislature to join us in putting it into effect. To restore a sense of balance between local and state governments, we must insist that local governments adopt reasonable spending limits. In fact, the realignment of our entire system of local governments is painfully overdue. Franklin D. Roosevelt proposed it in this very place almost a half-century ago. Certainly, we can no longer tolerate the profusion of government units, the competition for tax revenues, and the duplication of services. The state can no longer be viewed as ready to take on any and all costs which become too burdensome for localities. I shall appoint a commission of distinguished citizens to help us write a blueprint for less costly, more effective government at all levels of this state. The combined effect of these efforts, our full tax reduction program, the economic indexing of state expenditures, a state budget with less borrowing and new controls on local spending, will be, in this combined effect, will be to combat inflation on a state level and to decrease the demands of government on the pocketbooks of the citizens of New York State. But fiscal restraint and efficiency are not enough. New York must also have a vision of its future, a clear idea of our common destiny and our common goals. We New Yorkers are, and we've always been, the thinkers, the movers, and the doers of this nation. We must bring that strength and that vision to the job ahead of us, to the creation of a society where all our precious resources are used wisely. To achieve this, we must undertake the necessary and radical reordering of our government, our institutions, and our economy. In effect, we are embarking on the creative redevelopment of our entire public life. I propose that we start with our own house. No one here today can be unaware of the enormous cost involved in running for office and the dependency on special interests this can create. We must end this by providing for the public financing of election campaigns, full financial disclosure, and new limits on private contributions in all elections in New York State. With these actions, we can let the people know that it is their interests that are being served here, their voice we seek to heed. In 5 areas of critical importance to our future: energy, transportation, economic development, the environment, and housing, we must learn to use to full advantage and to reuse what is already in place. Our energy goal is simple and imperative. We must free ourselves from dependence on imported fuel. First, we must conserve. Every New Yorker must take on the responsibility for curtailing the consumption of oil. New Yorkers have already cut their use of oil by 30 million barrels a year. We must double that figure. To make this possible, I shall propose the creation of a state energy conservation bank to promote and help finance low-interest consumer loans for energy conservation. Moreover, since increased use of coal for electric production is a critical component of our strategy, I shall create a coal conversion group composed of involved state agencies and others, ensuring that the regulatory process is both prompt and fair. We shall rebuild our transportation system. New York spent its own money to put this system in place. Just this past November, the voters of this state approved the $500 million Transportation Bond Act to help sustain and expand it. The executive and legislative branches joined to create that program on a bipartisan basis, and the public supported it because it was a common-sense investment in our future. We are also putting into effect our $805 million accelerated transit program. All told, New York, then, is making over $1 billion capital investment in its transit system. But even this is not enough. We must develop a program to assure that our transit system will have the operating resources they require. This is the cornerstone of rapid transit redevelopment in this state. I shall send you a special message on public transportation, setting forth our recommendations for achieving the goal of financial stability for public transit. Again, this effort will require bipartisan cooperation. Coupled with our energy plan, this will mean a savings of billions of dollars that would otherwise have gone down the OPEC drain. An energy-efficient New York, equipped with the nation's finest transit systems, will also be a magnet to those industries seeking to cut their rising overhead for fuel and transport. But that is only part of our effort. I have ordered the state's Job Development Authority to redirect its program towards smaller companies, particularly in areas of chronic high unemployment, and to design new financing programs aimed directly at assisting small businesses and high-technology units where most new jobs are generated. Last year was most successful for the farmers of New York State. For the first time ever, farm earnings exceeded $2 billion. Under the able leadership of Lieutenant Governor Mario Cuomo, our farmer from Queens, our Rural Affairs Cabinet will continue to coordinate our many state programs for rural areas. We are determined to ensure the strength and growth of our agricultural industry. And as you know, we have carefully targeted our capital investment funds into projects that will have a catalytic effect, creating jobs and business long after construction is completed. The New York City Convention Center will be an economic and architectural showplace for the greatest city. The American Stock Exchange will remain in New York. We have invested funds in ports from Ogdensburg to Oswego to Albany. Buffalo looks forward now. It's begun. The eventual construction of a light rail system will be completed. From Long Island to Rochester, all New Yorkers can be proud of an investment we have made in a small village called Lake Placid. The 1980 Winter Olympics will be held in our Empire State, and they will be a success with lasting benefits, and I pay credit to you who provided our state share for this great event. Investments like these are some of the keys to lessening dependency on the state, to giving everyone the opportunity to hold a job. We recognize, of course, that economic growth cannot mean a mindless exploitation of the environment. The callousness with which our natural resources were once treated must be replaced with a new attitude that balances our needs with those of the environment. To achieve this, we must continue to solve the complex problem of hazardous wastes. All those who have fouled our air, our lands, and our waters must be held accountable, and together with Attorney General Robert Abrams, we are pursuing that objective. Rather than wait for the federal government to act, however, I shall ask for legislation to enable the Department of Conservation to design and enforce new regulations to control the disposal of hazardous waste. In addition to the $30 million we have already spent, we shall use $5 million more in state funds to restore the Love Canal area to productive use. Just as we seek to protect our natural resources, so also we must nurture the redevelopment of New York's community resources, our housing, and our neighborhoods. Here we must preserve our massive financial investment in housing, land, and real property, particularly the $3 billion in state-assisted housing intended for low and middle-income citizens. Again, I ask your support for a plan to revamp our Mitchell-Lama housing program. We know that the high cost of mortgages has forced many people out of the housing market altogether. Because of this, I shall recommend legislation authorizing the use of alternative mortgage instruments to make housing easier for families to acquire. Equally important, we must ensure that funds generated by increased interest rates are invested where they should be, in our state and in our communities. Redlining in New York cannot be tolerated. Accordingly, I shall include funds in the executive budget to enable the banking department to keep a close surveillance on patterns of mortgage lending. While these are general goals for our government and our society, there are other matters that touch the lives of our individual citizens more forcefully. Our courts and healthcare facilities, in particular, are institutions whose performance affects the confidence people place in their government. If we cannot protect our citizens from violence, nor help the sick, the aged, the needy, all our goals and plans, no matter how inspired, will have little value to the most afflicted. This administration regards the care of the sick and helpless, all those who must depend on us for their very existence, as its highest priority. The details of our program will be set forth in the annual State of the Health message that I shall soon submit to you. Last year, I appointed the Commission on the International Year of the Child, ably chaired by Matilda Cuomo, to celebrate the joys and recognize the needs of the children in New York State. This year, as I pledged, I shall include in my executive budget a children's budget to focus attention on the services we can provide for our youth. At the same time, we cannot neglect those in our state who have invested a lifetime in New York, our elderly citizens. Last year, we enacted, with your help, a major community services program for the aging, to which localities have responded enthusiastically. I shall seek funding to begin this partnership program for older New Yorkers. In addition, grant levels for our needy families in New York have been held stable since 1974. If the federal government will simply enact the welfare reform bill that has passed the House of Representatives, New York can, and I pledge that we will, provide a grant increase to those most in need to help them toward personal security. And in recognition of our duty to provide security of the person, we must halt the rise of violence in our society. We must enact together laws to stop the murderous proliferation of illegal weapons and handguns in New York State. On penalties for crime, the commission I appointed has submitted its recommendations. Disparities in sentencing must be ended, and punishment must be made swift and certain. I have made clear my stand on capital punishment. But because I recognize the need for grave measures in these times, I ask you to pass and tell you I am ready to sign a bill for life without parole for convicted murderers as soon as you pass it. Please give me that bill. To the citizens who come in contact with them, our courts symbolize both the power of government and the continuing need for its reform. A generation ago, Thomas E. Dewey, in this place, called for a merit system of appointed judges. We have moved part of the way along that path, and I am well pleased with our results. But I ask you to help me finish the job. I have pledged to the people of this state to take the clubhouse out of the courthouse. I ask you to help me keep that pledge for courts of merit in New York State. All our plans and hopes would be an empty gesture if we did not deal with the vestiges of discrimination in this state. Since 1975, we have doubled the number of minorities in positions of authority within state government and tripled the number of women. This year, we shall expand the efforts of our Affirmative Action Committee and take action to better ensure equal employment opportunities in state-assisted contracts. In every area, then, New York is striving to meet its obligations to our citizens. Were this an ordinary year, the kind which you and I have yet to share, we could devote this day and our sessions in New York to New York matters, germane only to ourselves and those we serve. But these extraordinary times require us to reflect on our relationship with the federal government. In the 70s, we had to look to Washington more than once for support for the state and survival for a great city. We were grateful then, and we remember now. I urge then my fellow New Yorkers to join me in firm support of President Carter in his determination to reject terrorist demands and secure the release of our hostages in Iran. As well, to oppose Soviet aggression in Afghanistan and to penalize the Soviet Union as long as it continues that aggression. Let us disavow any action or expression under the guise of election year debate which might lead our antagonists to believe that we lack a common resolve to oppose terrorism and aggression. Need I remind this body, 1980 is an election year in New York from March through November. I expect that all those candidates who seek the support of New Yorkers will discuss an agenda for action to strengthen our state, our region, as well as our country. New York seeks nothing more than fair recognition for the contribution we have made and can make. I do not seek to build a utopia on the Hudson by reaching into some cornucopia in the Potomac. I've been in both places. There's no cornucopia there, but we may reach utopia here. But the revenues of the federal government since 1977 have increased by over $500 million because we've reduced taxes in New York. Our successful effort to curb welfare and Medicaid in their costs is saving the federal treasury an additional $400 million a year. We ask the federal government to redirect now a portion of that $900 million to our most pressing areas of need. First, enact the welfare reform bill, which allocates $70 million to New York, and agree to absorb the local share of welfare and Medicaid for this fiscal year. I ask as well that the federal government bear its share of the cost New York incurs in caring for over 1 million undocumented aliens. To fail to acknowledge their existence in federal programs is unjust and inequitable. Second, revise the structure of the windfall profits tax so that does not mean a shortfall for the economy of our state and region. I recommend that we apply the value-added concept to realistic pricing of all fossil fuels as they reflect replacement value. That's realism. Create a national trust fund directly collected and administered by the federal government to properly underwrite conservation, winterization, mass transportation, and a system of rebates for those who must depend upon their automobiles for employment. The alternatives before us now serve only to saddle New York and the Northeast with newer and higher costs without compensating benefits. A value-added system for pricing fuel at world market rates would not penalize our region to pay profits to oil-rich states that are running large surpluses before the proposed windfall. It could also strengthen the dollar by helping to bring the federal budget into balance. Most important, such a trust fund could finance a 1980 federal tax cut designed to increase productivity. It would stimulate industrial development in those areas which now pay double the price of high energy costs and rising unemployment. Third, the federal government must act quickly to give this nation a sense of confidence in nuclear energy, confidence in the way nuclear power plants are built and operated, and the method used to dispose of nuclear waste. This can only come from an assertion of full federal determination, control, and management over all standards, all training, and all safeguards relating to nuclear power plants. Fourth, with regard to health care, we applaud recent federal actions to help and assist specific hospitals in New York City. Action that came, though, only after we had exhausted all of our resources. We need something more than quadrennial transfusions if we are to restructure our health care system so that it can serve all the people. The challenge of service, the challenge of that service, the very purpose of government, now demands, as I've said, a creative redevelopment of our institutions in this state. It demands as well a discipline and a determination far beyond the norm. But together, we have before chosen reality over illusion, and there can be no retreat. I come before you today, then, with a confidence based on the record of this legislature, and ask that you help to fashion a new society for this great state that prizes creativity over consumption, shared responsibility over humiliating dependency. We have proven together our strength in adversity. We have gained in the struggle a stamina that will carry us forth. Coupled with vision and that strength and that stamina, the dreams of New York can move this great nation. And around this land now, people in other places and those who come here are saying and echoing, I love New York. I ask you to join with me at the beginning of this decade in government in saying something more. As those who govern New York, we love New Yorkers and we're prepared to prove it. Thank you and God bless you.
In his State of the State address, Governor Hugh Carey has called for concrete action to resolve the energy crisis in New York State, and he has proposed spending limits for state and local governments. The governor said he will protect tax cuts which are already in place and urged that an accrual system of accounting be used to keep track of the state's money. This coverage of Governor Hugh Carey's State of the State address has been produced by the Executive Chamber Press Office through the facilities of the New York Network, a service of the State University of New York.